Are you convinced that TJ Dillashaw right now is clean?
Hell no. Hell no. That guy's
Do
a
you
little
think
weaker,
he's cheating
man.
right now still?
100%, man. That guy knows the ins and outs of that whole thing. He didn't get caught by USADA. He got caught by the New York State Athletic Commission. So there's a big discrepancy in that. Yeah, I know they're testing him a bunch, but if they ain't testing him for the gear, then what's the point?
What's up, guys? Derek, moreplates.com. Today we are talking about TJ Dillashaw and him being diced to the fucking socks, bro. This guy looking grainy, looking lean, looking like an absolute washboard chiseled cheese grater and a half. He is looking absolutely shredded. Flex emoji ahead of UFC 280. UFC posted, TJ retweeted, dialed, bro. And obviously he has come under heavy scrutiny for his popping in the past. In 2019, I believe it was, he popped for EPO use, or recombinant EPO more specifically, not literal bioidentical EPO, but besides the point. We go into that in other videos. But here he is looking nuts, and obviously people are, have him under the microscope. They're like, this guy's gotta be juicing again, this guy's doping, like whatever it is. This guy is a cheater, shouldn't be allowed to fight. Some people have their own opinions on if he should or shouldn't, and if he has paid his dues in terms of, the time off that he was suspended for or what. But besides the fact, he is here looking ready to go and looking mean. And as you would expect, the comment section inundated with PED references. At Derek Fitness, his nuts are still shrunk from the roids. Dude, didn't you basically give a speech yesterday about not doing this? I mean, I'm not a professional, so I can't say whether he is or not, but normally when veins are popping out like that, isn't that a sign of steroid use? Back when I watched WWF, it was easy to tell when one of them were juiced up. I'm not saying he's not on stuff, but being vascular has nothing to do with using steroids, lol. He fights at 135 and he's extremely lean and fit. Anyone that's like that is going to be very vascular. That is true. Imagine checking into the hotel and not knowing an actual assassin is taking mere selfies next door to you. Dude is 150, I'm not worried. According to USADA, TJ has been tested 9 times this year. That seems pretty low considering he's coming back from a 2-year suspension. The Azatar, oh my God, I probably fucking butchered that. Azatar brothers were tested like 30 times in 2021 or something. 9 times is a good chunk. Don't forget his before test and after fight test, that makes 11. He popped for EPO once, not steroids, but an anemia medication. Like when you say an anemia medication, you're sort of like underplaying how significant it could be and how useful it could be. Because again, it's like, what are we talking about when we're talking about trying to maintain the lowest body weight possible, but get the most performance enhancement possible in a UFC fight division? It's like, EPO is definitely arguably more useful even than anabolic steroids. But anyways, they tested his past 5 to 6 fights and all were negative for banned substances. He has low body fat here and probably dehydrated. Just here for the comments, Derek Brunson. I don't get the fucking joke here, but it's probably funny. Someone please explain this one. It looks like it has potential, but I don't understand. So, what do I think? What is the overall stance of the, UFC fan base and whatnot? That's what we'll be getting into, including the guy he is fighting, including what he thinks. He's, dealing with some pretty heavy duty interviews right now where people are rehashing his, 2019 positive test result. And he's sort of having to re-explain himself to kind of, get out of it and kind of downplay it essentially. So this was an interview done by BT Sport. TJ Dillashaw, open and honest reflection on drugs ban and returning to capture UFC gold.
Dropping to a weight class that my body physically wouldn't let me do. Full-blown anemic, 6-8 weeks out before the fight. So I took an anemia medication that I knew I couldn't, but I knew that it would get me back to where I was.
All right, so he's talked about at length, I guess, as much at length as an athlete would want to talk about his positive test result, about what he took. He specifically said the medication in terms of it being recombinant EPO, specifically Procrit. He talked about why he supposedly took it, what the reason behind it was, the logic driving it. And again, objectively, it is a very reasonable explanation that you might be like, okay, like I can see the, extreme circumstances in which his mind maybe went to there, whereas maybe it wouldn't have at his higher weight class fights. And he has a very, very logic driven, science-based explanation for why it might be the case. But again, if you want to dig into why it may or may not be the case as well, I break it down in this video from last year, the CEO of EPO returns, and I kind of go into the science of Procrit, what he was using specifically, you know, what kind of leeway you have with aberrations in your biological passport and whatnot when it's assessed by USADA and the WADA accredited labs in terms of what they're looking for popping you and actually testing you for EPO, stuff like that. And it's not worth getting into too much detail in this video, but absolutely worth a watch if you want to hear the pharmacology information that's from last year. So moving forward though, we have his opponent, Aljamain Sterling, which as you would expect, when he's interviewed, he's like obviously going to touch on this because it's a very contentious point and it makes you concerned too. Like if you're fighting a guy who's, you know, cranking, it's, you know, it's fucking sketchy. And it definitely calls into question, you know, the credibility of the person he's fighting against too. And in TJ, if this is somebody who has, you know, fought other people and beat other people while he's enhanced on PEDs, and what implications that may have and what extra risk that puts people at, and if it's fair or what is going on here. And without getting into the full-blown 25-minute interview, basically he goes on to say, at least this is the most notable point, I mean, we are tested so carefully for how many years he didn't get caught. He got caught by the New York State Athletic Commission. There's a big difference from getting caught from USADA. USADA's thing was that testing for EPO was too expensive. This whole time, I thought they tested for everything. They were pretty much only testing for steroids, so there's no guarantee that this guy's been doing it the right way ever. I know that he's being tested, but USADA wasn't the one that caught him. So what the hell is the difference between then and now? So again, when you are being tested, there is only so much resources in the budget available for like broad spectrum, bulletproof testing. So again, it's understandable why, if you're not a like fully backed organization with, like, again, I don't know how well funded USADA is to actually deploy these more elaborate tests on every single administration of a, you know, of a test. But I mean, like, obviously, if you want to be catching guys left, right, and center, or heavily deter use, you would be doing full-blown EPO testing on every sample. You'd be doing carbon isotope ratio testing on every sample. You'd be going like the full, you know, I don't know, all the way, you know, full-blown testing. You would not be looking for red flags in their passport in order to subsequently give you the, you know, infer that maybe there's something going on that's weird that we then further test and actually deploy the expensive, more elaborate tests after. But again, I can't speak to how well-funded or constrained they are, but ultimately, you know, that's the situation that's imposed. And it is true that EPO testing is not done across the board, nor is it that prevalent. And as you would imagine, there is shit that's gonna slip through the cracks, just like in this case. So ultimately, it's pretty evident that there is holes in the system that either are not funded well enough to be comprehensive enough, or, you know, who knows? Is there something more insidious or fucked up going on? You know, everyone has their own opinions at the end of the day. I'm not one to say or assert any which case. I'm just interpreting what I'm seeing. This is Dana White's reaction. So he is now touching on the situation as well. He's touched on it before, presumably, but this is him giving the most, like, you know, obviously people are hitting him up for interviews, asking him his opinion on the situation in terms of him coming back, what his stance is on it, and does he think the scrutiny is adequate right now? And this was his stance.
Dana told Barstool Sports, first of all, the guy is probably, and I don't know this for a fact, but I would assume he's one of the most tested guys in the company right now. USADA is probably all over him, but I think he made a mistake and he handled it like a man. I'll tell you what, we've had a lot of guys in the history of this company who have been busted for PEDs and handled it the exact opposite way. They handled it not like men. Dillashaw did. He took it on the chin. You've got to respect him for that. And that's going to wrap it up.
That's Full Mount MMA, by the way, a really good channel for kind of like getting up to speed on what's going on in the UFC. So anyways, how elaborately is he tested at the end of the day? You know, Dana says he's probably heavily tested right now, one of the most tested guys in the division or in the league in general. Is that the case? When we go into the UFC USADA database, you can see athlete test history and really see like how much scrutiny are these guys under. So TJ back in 2019 was tested 7 times. And I believe he was popped at in January, a January test. So moving forward to 2020, he was tested 11 times. And in 2021, this guy was like fucking elaborately tested. 25 tests, like pretty thorough, at least from a frequency standpoint, not necessarily from a depth aspect. We don't really know how far they went with it, but 25 tests. So now we go to 2022, and keep in mind, we're like, you know, coming in on the tail end of the year here. So this is, you would expect like 20 plus tests again, you would think. Like this guy's starting to make it up the ranks again. He's starting to contend with top guys in the division. So you would think like heavy fucking scrutiny, and it looks like 9 tests. Now, I'm not to say that that's not, if it was comprehensive enough and truly random, I'm not to say that that's not a massive deterrent and something that could prevent a guy who knows he's under the microscope heavily and can't afford to get away with this shit again, or even, you know, test the system probably. The likelihood is probably much higher that he is not doing something than previously. Absolutely, the guy's probably fucking terrified of testing positive for something right now. But again, 9 tests. Is he one of the most heavily tested guys in the division right now? I thought this was an interesting video by the MMA guru. This is actually the guy who I believe Kamaru Usman was talking about when he was like, some fucking guy on YouTube was talking about my stomach, blah, blah, blah. I'm pretty sure he was talking about the MMA guru. But basically, he goes into the UFC testing database and finds like frequency of tests. And he sees that this guy, Jiri Proch, I'm terrible at pronunciations, guys. So, Jiri, let's look him up here. He is tested 36 times. And you could actually just see it here if I zoomed in. But yeah, 36 times. That's a lot, dude. It's a fucking shit ton. So he is tested like 4 times as much as Dillashaw is. And is he, you know, is that justified? Does that make any logical sense? Even when you look up like, I don't know, like Paulo Costa. This guy has been tested 12 times versus the Jiri guy 36 times. Like, does that make a lot of sense? How random is it? Who's selecting the, you know, the frequency? What is going into it? All I know is that at the very least, if you have a guy who has historically tested positive for EPO, you would think he would probably be in the double digits at least. So it definitely is interesting nonetheless. I'm not saying that it proves anything necessarily, but it's very interesting to see that this guy is in the single digits, despite the fact that he is like arguably one of the guys that should be tested with the highest scrutiny, with the most elaborate and frequent testing right now. I'm not to say this isn't a deterrent, but again, it's interesting, like the selection, like how random is it? Like how is the frequency assessed, especially given the risk of certain individuals versus others? I don't know. I would love to hear a breakdown of how they go about determining frequency between athletes, because to me, this seems like something that should have been a little bit more frequent at least, regardless of how elaborate or thorough it is, how bulletproof it is or isn't right now. Like 9 tests, even with their current testing, to establish a more dialed in biological passport, get more data points, etc. I don't know. It just seems a little bit light to me. I don't know. I could be wrong on that, but to me, it was an interesting tidbit nonetheless. So yeah, there would absolutely be incentive for him to cheat if he knew he could get away with it. But I think the likelihood is high that he would be the most deterred from doing so than he ever has before. I'm not saying that he's clean by any means. Certainly possible he's doing something more science-based, you know, using like a designer EPO, you know, like an analog or a synthetic novel drug that is, you know, designed by a chemist that could otherwise replicate the same blood-building effects. There is shit that does this that is not detectable. And again, that's why you have to rely on the biological passport to some extent too, and why they have this thing as a backbone for some of the infrastructure of their testing parameters, where you have like all these data points and you can assess fluctuations and whatnot. And you would assume they're being a bit more dialed in on assessing his fluctuations too, to assume like, you know, maybe this is a red flag that we should look into further when he has an even smaller aberration. But again, I don't have the data to actually see that, because they do not have public test results nowadays for us to actually dig into and really analyze thoroughly like they might have, you know, years ago. But based on this, I can definitely say he's not being tested enough relative to some of the other athletes that seemingly have less justification behind their testing frequency, especially if you're thinking about resource allocation. It's like, okay, of the 36 tests, and again, you guys tell me if that guy, you know, should have been tested 36 times. I haven't looked into his history enough to know if that's the case. Drop in the comments section. But this guy, you know, of those 36 tests, how many of those urine analysis is plural, would you have been able to maybe like take off that guy and then allocate towards like a full-blown EPO test proactively on TJ or something? Or a, you know, a carbon isotope ratio test on somebody like, you know, a guy who's popped for anabolics before. You know, it seems a little bit like, you know, the allocation of funds is at least kind of odd for sure. Because again, like, you know, 20 plus tests, obviously an EPO test is not going to cost as much as like 20 plus like, you know, full spectrum urine analysis that are doing the whole steroidal module, the entire, you know, like WADA banned substance list for just like presence of these compounds. So it's odd, and it's definitely questionable what is going into that determination process. But let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. Do you think he's doing something? Do you think he's not? What do you think about him coming back? Are you a fan, not a fan? What do you think about the upcoming fight? Who you got in it? And yeah, any and all thoughts, help the algorithm, much appreciated. Like, subscribe. Check out my blog, moreplates.com. Follow me on Instagram, @moreplates.dates, Facebook, Snapchat, Twitter, TikTok, Apple Podcasts. If you want to support the channel, you can check out anything I'm associated with in the video description below. My preventative medicine, hormone replacement therapy platform, Gorilla Mind, nootropic formulas, Gorilla Mode pre-workout formulas designed myself. Recommended diet model for gaining muscle and sports performance whilst being mindful of electrolyte balance, micronutrient intake, etc. Most diet models, frankly, just look at protein intake, calories, and very basic cookie cutter influencer shit, to be honest. They don't look at the actual specifics around diet quality from a health standpoint and a performance standpoint. As an athletic based, somebody who's in a sport, for example, it's rather very focused on just, do you have enough protein to, gain muscle? And that's about it. You definitely want something more comprehensive, and this makes it pretty newbie proof, in my opinion, even with some sort of base diets that you can sort of tweak and adjust, but have at least a cookie cutter infrastructure to then build off of based on your own individual needs, with the basis of knowledge throughout the ebook for you to see like why you would be using something, where to backfill certain micronutrients, how to maximize your thyroid function, metabolism, etc., sleep quality, electrolyte balance, all that kind of good stuff. So anything else that supports me, it's all down there. Clothing company that sponsors me, it's all down there. It's much appreciated when you guys use my codes, links, etc. And I will talk to you guys soon.